You think I'm the biggest myth? Please. History is full of whoppers. Columbus discovering America, Marie Antoinette handing out cake. I deliver presents, not propaganda.
What if I told you some of history's most famous moments never happened? These myths are so ingrained, questioning them feels absurd. Today we're taking a sledgehammer to those comfortable lies. The truth is messier, but far more interesting. Let's finally bury these historical zombies, at least until your uncle brings them up again next Christmas. Let's talk about Napoleon Bonaparte, the so-called tiny tyrant. We all know the image. A small, furious man in a big hat, trying to conquer the world. Movies and cartoons love to show him as a pipsqueak, stomping his boots in rage. But here's the truth. The idea of Napoleon as a tiny tyrant is pure myth, one of history's most successful character assassinations. So how tall was Napoleon, really? The famous 5'2" comes from a French yardstick, not British. Convert it, and he was about 5'7", average for his time. The short myth, British propaganda and a nickname, not reality. The Napoleon complex, more marketing than medicine. Picture a Viking, big, bearded, axe in hand, and of course, a horned helmet. It's the iconic image, from football logos to Halloween parties. But here's the truth, there's zero evidence Vikings ever wore horned helmets in battle. Not one has ever been found. Real Viking helmets were practical, horn-free, and built for battle, not for show. So if the horned helmet is a complete fabrication, where on earth did the idea come from? Why is this ridiculously impractical headwear the first thing we think of? For the answer, we have to fast forward about 800 years from the end of the Viking Age, all the way to 19th century Germany. The man we have to thank, or perhaps blame, for this enduring myth is none other than the composer Richard Wagner. Yes, the guy who wrote that Kill the Wobbit music. He's the patient zero of the horned helmet pandemic. In the 1870s, Wagner staged his monumental opera cycle, Der Ring des Nibelungen, or the Ring Cycle, for those of us who don't speak dramatic German. It was a sprawling epic based on Norse and Germanic sagas. For the production's costumes, designer Carl Emil Doppler decided to give his Norse heroes and villains some suitably dramatic headgear. He drew inspiration from ancient Greek and Roman descriptions of northern barbarians and from Bronze Age artifacts found in Scandinavia, artifacts from a period 1,000 years, the Vikings, that did include horned helmets, likely used for ceremonial purposes, not battle. He mashed it all together and slapped some horns on his opera singers. The opera was a sensation. It was a massive cultural event, and its vision of a mythical, romanticized Germanic past became incredibly influential. The image of the horned, helmeted warrior, bellowing on a stage, was powerful and unforgettable. It was then picked up by artists and illustrators throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Painters like the Swede Johann August Malmström ran with the idea, creating dramatic, nationalistic paintings of Vikings with glorious and completely fictional horned helmets. The image just looked cool. It was romantic, savage, and visually striking, and from there it just snowballed. The image was so much more exciting than the reality of a simple, boringly practical bowl-shaped helmet. It jumped from opera to painting, from painting to books, from books to early films, and eventually to cartoons and NFL logos. The lie was simply more fun than the truth. So the next time you see a Viking with horns on his helmet, just remember you're not looking at a historically accurate warrior. You're looking at the brainchild of a 19th century German costume designer who wanted to make his opera singers look a little more fabulous. The Great Fire of London, 1666. A city of wood and thatch, drier than a microwave reheated biscuit. For 4 days, London burned. The official death toll? 6. Not 6,000, just 6. But the poor and undocumented likely weren't counted. History, after all, is written by those with houses to lose. The Great Fire of London wasn't a mass casualty event, but it was an economic apocalypse. Over 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and the city's financial heart were reduced to rubble. Fire safety in 1666 was a joke. Officials thought a woman could put it out. The real lesson: run faster than your neighbor and don't look back.
Let them eat cake? I never said that. But sure, go ahead. Reduce me to a meme while ignoring the corrupt system that fed off the poor. History loves a scapegoat. Bon appetit.
Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, forever linked to the infamous line, "Let them eat cake." But she never said it. There's no evidence in any diary, letter, or document tying those words to her. The phrase first appeared in Rousseau's writings, years before Marie was even queen. It became the perfect story to paint her as out of touch, history's ultimate royal misattribution. So, why did this lie stick to Marie Antoinette like superglue? Because she was the perfect scapegoat. By the time the revolution was in full swing, anti-monarchist propaganda was running rampant, and Marie was public enemy number one. She was portrayed as a frivolous, promiscuous foreigner who was bankrupting the country with her extravagant hairdos and gambling habits. Pamphlets and cartoons depicted her in the most vulgar terms imaginable. In that toxic atmosphere, a quote like, "Let them eat cake," wasn't just a story, it was a weapon. It confirmed every negative stereotype the revolutionaries wanted people to believe about her. The phrase perfectly encapsulated the narrative of a monarchy that was not just corrupt, but fundamentally indifferent to the suffering of its people. It didn't matter if she actually said it. What mattered was that it true. It was the ultimate fake news of the 18th century, a piece of disinformation so powerful it helped justify regicide. It turned a complex political and economic crisis into a simple morality play, the starving, virtuous poor versus the gluttonous, wicked queen. And in that play, she was cast as the villain long before the curtain rose. The irony is that by some accounts, Marie Antoinette was actually involved in charitable work. She wrote letters expressing concern for the poor and even established a society for maternal health. Now let's be clear, this doesn't suddenly make her a saint or a champion of the working class. She still lived a life of unimaginable luxury while her country crumbled. But the historical person was far more complex than the one-dimensional caricature that the cake quote creates. She was a flawed figure in an impossible situation, not a cartoon villain gleefully mocking the hungry. Ultimately, she was executed for treason, not for being a terrible pastry chef. She was a symbol of a hated regime, and the revolution needed symbols to destroy. The quote was just the icing on the, well, you know. As the brief says, she got beheaded for being tone deaf, but apparently not for anything she actually said. It's a chilling reminder that in the court of public opinion, a good story, even a false one, can be far more powerful and far more deadly than the truth.
Discovered America? I landed in the Bahamas thinking it was India, enslaved the locals, and still got a holiday. Honestly, I'm less of a navigator and more of a PR miracle.
Christopher Columbus, the man, the myth, the holiday. We're told he discovered America in 1492, but almost every part of that story is wrong. Columbus never set foot in North America. He landed in the Bahamas, thinking he'd reached Asia. And you can't discover a place where millions already lived. Even for Europeans, Vikings like Leif Erikson beat him by centuries. Columbus didn't discover America, wasn't the first European here, and got lost. So why the statues and a federal holiday? It's all about 19th century American PR. Columbus was rebranded as a founding hero to unite a young nation and help immigrants claim belonging. But this myth hides the truth. Columbus's arrival began a violence, slavery, and genocide for indigenous people. That's a truth worth remembering, even if it doesn't get you a day off. Let's talk about Emperor Nero, the poster boy for terrible Roman emperors. The legend says he played the fiddle while Rome burned, but almost every part of that story is gloriously wrong. The fiddle didn't even exist then. Nero may have played a lyre, but he wasn't even in Rome when the fire started. In reality, he rushed back and organized relief efforts. The fiddling story? Just ancient PR spun by his enemies. If Nero didn't start the fire, who did? The truth is, nobody knows. Ancient Rome was a tinderbox. Fires were common, and the city was a mess of wooden tenements and open flames. But when disaster struck, Nero needed a scapegoat. He blamed the Christians, unleashing brutal persecution to save himself. The myth makes Nero a joke. The reality is far more chilling. You've heard it. Einstein, the wild-haired genius, failed math as a kid. It's the ultimate underdog story, except it's pure myth. In reality, Einstein was a math prodigy, mastering calculus by 15. The myth started because he failed non-math parts of a school entrance exam, never math. So, next time you see that motivational poster, remember, even legends get misquoted. A Ripley's Believe It or Not column once claimed Einstein failed math. He laughed. He never did. But the myth stuck because we love the idea of genius rising from failure. In truth, Einstein was just bored by unimaginative teaching. He was always ahead, just in the wrong classroom. He was simply, undeniably brilliant. The Salem witch trials, often imagined as fiery burnings, were actually far less cinematic. In Salem, accused witches weren't burned. They were hanged on Gallows Hill, 19 in all. One man, Giles Corey, was crushed to death with stones. No bonfires, no stakes, just rope, stone, and a grim reality. Why do we all misremember Salem? Pop culture and dramatic fire imagery make us think of burning at the stake, but in reality, the Puritans hanged their accused witches, cold, legal, and chillingly bureaucratic. The truth is more mundane and more terrifying. They didn't need fire, they had the law. The Library of Alexandria, often imagined as a grand temple of knowledge lost in a single fiery night. But that's mostly a myth. Its end was slow, centuries of neglect, not one big blaze. The real tragedy? It died from apathy and budget cuts, not fire. The Library of Alexandria wasn't destroyed in a single dramatic event. It faded away, neglected, underfunded, and abandoned as the world changed. Death by bureaucracy, budget cuts, political turmoil, religious strife, and indifference. Sometimes the greatest threat to knowledge isn't fire, just a world that stops caring. So what have we learned today? Well, for one thing, that history, much like your average Instagram feed, is heavily filtered. It's curated, cropped, and presented with a caption that often has very little to do with the messy reality of what actually happened. We're given the highlight reel, the dramatic fire, the snappy one-liner, the cartoonishly evil villain, because it makes for a much better story. The truth is often complicated, anticlimactic, and requires footnotes. And honestly, who has the time for footnotes when you can just say Napoleon was short and call it a day? Half the stuff we think we know, the bedrock facts of our pub quiz knowledge, is either twisted, oversimplified, or completely made up for dramatic effect. Witches weren't burned in Salem. Marie Antoinette never offered cake to anyone. Columbus was terrible at geography. And the worst part, the truth is usually way more interesting. The slow, bureaucratic decay of the Library of Alexandria is a far more relevant and chilling cautionary tale for our own time than a simple story about a single fire. History isn't a movie, it's a sprawling, messy, contradictory document, and we've been reading the Cliff's Notes version. And this matters, it really does. Because these myths, these easy-to-digest lies, shape how we see the world. They become shorthand for complex ideas like the Napoleon complex or a Nero moment. They create a cartoon version of the past that stops us from learning its real lessons. They flatten historical figures into one-dimensional characters and complex events into simple fables. We owe it to the people who lived through these moments, and to ourselves, to at least try and get the story straight, even if it means admitting the Vikings' helmets were disappointingly horn-free. So the next time you hear a historical fact that sounds a little too perfect, a little too neat, be skeptical, dig a little. The real story is almost always lurking just beneath the surface, and it's filled with more nuance, more irony, and more humanity than any of the myths. Got a favorite fake historical moment I missed? Drop it in the comments below. I might just roast it in a future video. And remember, some lies live longer than the empires that told them. Thanks for watching.